save lives, to prevent fires, to prevent floods, and overall to protect and to guarantee better quality of life for our common citizens. How we have agreed to give the mandate to the DG of FISA to make it happen. Essentially based in a very interesting process which was launched by Joseph Achenbach a few months ago, putting together a very high-level group of experts that yesterday have reported on their recommendations, and member states have agreed on their recommendations, which, very briefly, Joseph will summarize, but he will include three main accelerating initiatives in terms of crisis management, in terms of greening our society and the economy, in terms of protecting our space assets, as well as two clear missions for ESA to be done in the future. Again, this is a process which will continue over the coming months, and we will meet in February in France. But the most important issue today was a clear and unanimous agreement to mandate the Director General of FISA to follow the necessary negotiations among member states to make this idea and this vision possible in order that all single European citizens do better use, understand and create value out of space systems. Thank you.
So thank you, Philippe, and thank you, Manuel. I will show in a minute a few slides, but maybe just one or two words before I go into the slides. So first of all, as ESA Director General, I'm very happy about the Matosinhos Manifesto that has been approved today. It's a big milestone. Some people might even call it a historic milestone because the endorsement of three accelerators and two inspirators is a very important step for space in Europe. And if I say Europe, that really means all the main actors in Europe. That is, of course, the European Space Agency, the member states, but also the European Commission and various institutions and organizations. And this really is a collective effort, and I'd like to underline that this is something that Europe will do together and as contributions and as a way forward for Europe in space. So this was an extremely important milestone. Let me show you now some slides which give you a bit of background on what these accelerators and inspirators are, and I go to the first slide actually to show you the official picture of the ministers and the heads of delegations, which you see here collectively. Of course, there have been more people in the room, but these are the heads of the delegations that have been represented today. As you see, a very significant group of people who are involved in making decisions for space in Europe. And I think this is very important that we have the decision makers here in Portugal. The next slide shows the Manifesto itself. It is online, so you can read it quietly, but it is a short paper, but very clear, and gives a very clear message to the various people in Europe. So what is the context? The context is that we are, of course, focusing on a new way of how we want to move space forward. These accelerators have been defined in a sense that you unite the different forces of space capabilities, but also we really focus on the urgency to act. The urgency to act comes from climate change. Don't need to explain the importance of climate change, but also disasters that are linked or triggered by climate change, or certainly intensified by climate change, as the Minister was mentioning before, fires, floods, storms, but also other disasters, where space, of course, can help in providing some critical information. The other element is that the high-level group, which has been working over the last 4 months, has been also saying very clearly that space is underutilized and needs to be reinforced and made much stronger in order to really make sure that the assets that are flying in space and with its corresponding ground segment is utilized properly. And not to forget, strengthening European leadership and STEM have been very important points that came also out from this group's report, which is also published online. So what is the added value of these accelerators? And you see here the headline, Shortcut to a Better Future. Indeed, what we want to offer is that we do use space for the needs of society, putting the user at the center and making sure that we are accelerating the use of space. Accelerating means certainly through public entities like ESA, the Commission, and member state organizations, but also in particular through commercial companies who will be stimulated and where we will initiate a number of programs where they can develop their assets and we as public entities are anchor customers in order to buy services, buy data, whatever these commercial companies are offering. And this is certainly a trend that happens worldwide, but certainly in Europe, something that we want to reinforce and accelerate, literally, as the name indicates, also very strongly in the European context. And here you see the three accelerators and two inspirators. I will introduce them one by one, but this is the package that has been fully endorsed through the Manifesto, and these are focal areas that are being built up and defined. The first one, Space for a Green Future, is really showing what does it mean, or why do we need to do that? And what you see here is what is the cost of not accelerating. That means not utilizing space to the maximum extent possible for a better green future or European Union Green Deal for the EU member states. All of the member states have very clear targets to become climate neutral, most of them by 2050. And what you see here is that actually, if you're not accelerating, if you're not looking at the impacts of climate change, then the economic damage is much bigger. And you see here some of the figures which are listed, which are coming from independent studies. In other words, if we are not acting, if we are not using all the means that we have, the price to pay is a much bigger one than if we can take some immediate action. And space, of course, will be one element. Does not solve all the problems, is very clear, but one element that addresses the green future. So what do we do? There are some elements shown here. Certainly building up a digital twin Earth. That means a combination of observations from space on the ground, coupled with Earth system models, coupled with artificial intelligence, machine learning, using high-performance computing to simulate our planet or elements of our planet. This, of course, is a mammoth task. It's a big challenge to do. But we have already started working on it, but we will certainly intensify this work. As you see also here the flag of the European Union. This is something where ESA will work very much hand in hand with the European Commission to implement and develop these digital twins. Already we have worked in ESA context since about 2 years on building up these digital twins, and now we are about to sign a contract with DG Connect for the next phase, but there will be more coming through the accelerators that are being built up. Then we are building green information factories, and here the emphasis is on plural, factories. That means centers, elements where products are being developed or information is being developed, which is used in order to implement the carbon neutrality or climate neutrality. Information that relates to the use of agriculture, energy, conversion from one energy type to another one, traffic. There are many aspects that are related to it, and of course you need to have this information to help member states or help companies to become more carbon neutral or more reducing their carbon emissions, and this certainly needs a lot of information from different elements. Then on the bottom right you see quantum gravimetry, which is quite an interesting element by itself. It's a technology to use quantum gravimetry for mass change measurements and changes of the gravity field, which can be in many cases related to climate parameters, not always, but certainly climate is a huge user and application domain where this technology will fly. As you know, it works on ground, but not yet tested in space, and this is certainly something we would like to investigate. It's a big challenge and will take a bit of time to do that, but certainly something we would like to work on. And then accelerating decarbonization, which is more generic to help getting zero emissions or carbon neutrality or climate neutrality, as it is called in the EU Green Deal context, in order to work towards the goals which are clearly spelled out by the various member states of 2050 at the latest, or typically reaching this status. The next one, rapid and resilient crisis response. Again here, what is the cost of not accelerating? What you see here is a graph that indicates that the damages, the economic cost of disasters have increased over time, as you see here on the left-hand side on this graph. And on the right-hand side, you see some figures of the more recent crises that occurred, the floods in the Central European part, or fires as they occur all the time. I'm not going into depth here, but the message is very clear. Caused by climate change, the crises are more intense and the economic damages are much higher, and this is a fact, and this is something that happens. So what do we do? Again, we use satellites in order to provide information on one side through observing systems in space, but also in situ, hubs, all different sources linked together. And on the right-hand side, you see a network of an integrated smart network where this information is connected and brought to the people quickly. And this is actually a perfect case where the EU flagship on secure connectivity will be working hand in hand with this accelerator, where on one side you build the content of the information that is necessary. On the other side, you have a secure network that allows to bring this information to the people wherever it is needed. Of course, the message here is that you have frequent observations, that means more satellites are needed, more observations are required, and quick delivery, that means rapidly getting this information to the users, also partially calculating in space. Cognitive cloud computing is a catchword here, that you do process data with artificial intelligence in space to be faster, recognize events, and deliver information to the people. And then, since we are all aware how important it is to protect our assets in space, meaning satellites, but also astronauts, and I think this topic has come up very recently, also this week in the news. It is clear that we are getting more and more satellites in space. What you see here is the active satellites in orbit. Don't need to explain the figure because you are all very familiar with this. It is also clear that this trend goes steep upwards in the next coming years. So in other words, there will be more and more satellites there, active ones, but also more and more debris will be available that is potentially endangering satellites or human beings, astronauts in space. And this is something that I am very worried about, because our satellites, our astronauts need to be safe. And that's why we produce or why we propose an accelerator that does exactly that, protecting our space assets from space debris on one side, but also space weather being another element that might endanger our assets. And let me come to the inspirators, just to highlight that this is quite a different dimension. While the accelerators are really focusing on the societal needs, the inspirators are really, as the name says, inspiring people in space. On one side, human space exploration, very well understood what this means. The question, of course, being, does Europe want to develop its own capabilities in the medium to long term? The answer is a difficult one. I fully recognize all the implications. It has to be a political decision. It's not a technical decision. And this is something that I would at least like to ask the question to decision makers. Is this something where Europe should really engage itself? As you all perfectly know, today we have 3 nations being capable of launching their own astronauts into space, a 4th one coming up very soon, India, and there will be other ones on the horizon. Question is, does Europe also want to have its independent access to space for future space exploration? That means the next frontiers, which are, of course, in low Earth orbit, but also on the Moon, on Mars, and beyond. And the other inspirator which we have highlighted is Icy Moon, Icy Moon sample return mission, to basically ask a very fundamental question of mankind: is there life out there? Meaning, astrobiologists are saying if there is life somewhere in our solar system, then these icy moons around Jupiter or Saturn are possible places where it could be preserved. because there's an ice cover and there's water underneath. And it would be extremely interesting to just know whether there is life out there, that means in these icy moons or not, and analyzing such a probe from an icy moon 700 million kilometers away from our Earth would be quite a challenge in terms of technology, but also in terms of findings that comes out. So certainly very inspiring for our future generation. And here, the roadmap, the next steps, Space Summit, it was mentioned by Minister Heitor, 16th of February planned in Toulouse under French co-presidency of ESA and European Union. And then, of course, the ESA Ministerial Conferences in 2022 at the end of November, and, of course, follow-on conferences later on. So thank you very much for this short introduction. I hand over to Philippe.
Thank you very much. I'm tempted to ask you, after all this journey of preparation, both of you, how do you feel after this meeting?
From my point of view, we should be very happy. And again, as I mentioned, I understand this as one really and effective step towards a better Europe, but particularly the unanimous vote around the table to give a clear mandate to the ESA DG to transform and to evolve ESA. And this was a process over the last months, and so we should be happy to succeed in this process. And so I'm sure that next year will be a very important year for ESA and for European citizens at large.
Joseph, a big relief?
A bit exhausted, but a big relief and very happy.
Good. I would like to hand over to Hugo Seneca from the Portuguese Expresso. So, Hugo, floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, you all. I have a question for, well, I hope you're listening me. I have a question for Mr. Joseph Aschenbacher. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. Mr. Aschenbacher, it's a very simple question. You talked about two inspirators. As I understand, well, you'll still have to approve these two inspirators in the near future during the next interministerial meeting in Toulouse, if I'm not wrong. And do you think you'll have the political support for these two inspirators when these two inspirators can be put in place and produce practical effects? Or if you want, when will we have a European mission to the moon?
Okay, thank you for your question, a very direct one. So just a small rectification, Toulouse will be a political meeting and is not a budget meeting. That means there is not budgets being collected. This is at least in the ESA context, the ESA Ministerial Conference, which is planned at the end of next year in November. But Toulouse will certainly be a very important political milestone because there the member states will express a political endorsement, willingness on what has to be done next. So what I have got in the through the Matosino's Manifesto is a mandate to now work building up these accelerators and inspirators. So that means to define what needs to be done, who can contribute what, and what are the overall frameworks, how these are being implemented. So yes, now we have got the starting shot to define them, to prepare them, but of course many questions of what exactly it means and how much they cost and all these elements will need to come over the next months. This is not a trivial exercise, as you can imagine, but certainly something that will be built up over time. Depending a bit on the accelerators, some of them are more built up through building blocks, others are a bit more, let's say, as a generic program, but this depends really on the accelerators and inspirators.
Thank you, Hugo. You mentioned it's your first question. If you have a second one, we can take it after. I'd like to hand over to Peter Dieselding. Peter, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, Peter. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two questions. First, I think for Joseph, the second one for Minister Heitor. Joseph, I know it's not the responsibility of ESA or the government people there today, but did anybody think to maybe try to encourage this meeting to go back to their national delegations and encourage a resolution of this problem between the UK and the Commission on Copernicus? There was a November 30 deadline. It seems like if there is no resolution, then the UK leaves a lot of work for its industry on the table, and the European Commission leaves 750 million euros that could come from the UK on the table for future Copernicus missions. Was there any discussion of that today? And for Minister Heitor, I think this is best addressed to you. There's some question there today about new funding sources for ESA, and that could cover a wide body of things. And you mentioned one that I'd like to ask you about. You said that the national recovery plans have now been approved one by one by the European Commission, might somehow come to the aid of the ESA budget or be used in some way on behalf of the ESA budget. Could you explain how that might be done? Thanks.
Sorry, I repeat, thank you, Peter. I start with the first question on Copernicus, the 750 million. It was not discussed in the meeting and it was not addressed. This is certainly an issue that is still on the table. Needs to be tackled, I fully agree with you, but it was not raised during the IMM meeting.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your question, which is a really important and timely question. Actually, diversification of funding sources, or at least go beyond the traditional public resources engaged with ESA, was definitely addressed and will be addressed over the years to come. And now we have already examples. Actually, during the meeting were particularly discussed and presented either by myself or the Spanish representative that two countries, Portugal and Spain, has already agreed to join efforts through their own recovery plans to build a joint constellation of new satellites, and we will do it in collaboration with ESA. But also Italy. Italy has already committed a part of their recovery plan to new space, and particularly to space-related applications, and it has been already discussed by Italy and ESA, a collaboration in that regard, so that it is not anymore a dream, a vision, but at least the Italian relationship with ESA has already been discussed formally in ESA level, and Portugal and Spain has already agreed in collaborate between their recovery funds. And I'm sure others will come, because this is certainly an opportunity to engage all our efforts, not only to the direct taxpayer, but through this unique procedure the European Commission has made by going to the markets and to lend a large fraction of money for the recovery of Europe. Apart from the recovery plans, we certainly have been able, over the last few years, some of our countries, Portugal definitely, also to complement the traditional ESA funding with European structural funds. We will continue to do that, and I'm sure other countries will also continue doing that. And beyond these different sources of funding, certainly the key issue of also mandating ESA and through the ESA Director General to essentially being able to raise private funding was particularly considered in the expert report, and it was interesting to note, and I should acknowledge that, the expert team itself have included one very smart entrepreneur that actually himself he presented his own part as a representative of young entrepreneurs in Europe, and he was very, very clear, like today another Portuguese entrepreneur were very clear how they have succeeding over the last few years, and they pretend to succeed in attracting particularly investment funds for space activities. So I believe that we should be optimistic in understanding the different ways of diversifying and augmenting the overall budget for space activities in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now I'm going to move to Jonathan Amos from BBC. Jonah, it's for you.
Yeah, hi. I hope, Philip, that you can hear me.
Yes, go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Yeah, I mean, just sort of slightly picking up on that point from Minister Heitor, and also reading the report of the expert group, one of the great problems in Europe seems to be access to private finance. If you look at the United States, the amount of venture capital that is going into new space companies dwarfs what Europe is able to access. And I'm kind of struggling really to understand how we can open that tap in Europe, because it seems to me it's really quite key. Yes, you're going to have an increase in ESA's budget, which is historic and unprecedented. But it seems if you're going to succeed, you need a hose pipe of private finance. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on that.
Jonathan, I thank you very much for this question. And I would like also to recall that our keynote speaker early in the morning, Nuno Sebastião, that is the CEO of a large unicorn in Portugal, Fidzai, he was very clear in challenging all of us. Actually, he mentioned that 70% of their company, which is a Portuguese unicorn with over 1,000 engineers, with a market valuation over 5 billion euros. But he reported that 70% of his company is owned by US investors who have an appetite for risk and are fast. And again, we know this, and therefore we need to really collectively to solve this issue. The good news, though, are that we are also at the same time in Europe overall launching the new European Framework Programme, Horizon Europe, under which there is a specific pillar to develop the so-called European Innovation Council with a new fund for entrepreneurs and to accelerate startups. Also, other investment, particularly European Investment Bank, has shown recently a large interest in providing funding and co-funding for private investments in the space area. So definitely we have the capacity, we have the entrepreneurs, we collectively definitely need to use the new opportunities under Horizon Europe and the European Innovation Council to make it happen.
Joseph, would you like to complement?
No, thank you, Philippe. Minister Heitor said it very clear. There is a huge discrepancy, and he mentioned one example, which is a very impressive one. It is true, and we all, of course, know this very well, that there's an order of magnitude, if not more, in between the access to venture capital funding in Europe and in the US, for example. But certainly from an ESA perspective, this is a problem, first of all, which we recognize and where we want to work on. And it takes time. It will need several steps in order to improve this situation for Europe. But the new directorate which I have created for commercialization, industrial policy and procurement will have as one of its main tasks to look into funding opportunities as one element of how we can make progress. Of course, we will explore different options from European investment funds, European Investment Bank, which are more of institutional character, to all, of course, to venture capital funds. We are making now contacts or intensify contacts with many of them in order to help our European SME startups to get access to this money. It will be a task that is taking time and energy, but certainly something I want to put a focus on, and from the ESA side, certainly help where we can. Of course, much is driven by the commercial forces, which is correct, which it has to be, but certainly we can also provide some support, and I'm committed to do what I can do.
Thank you. Let's move now to Joshua Posaner from Politico Europe.
Hi there, guys. Assuming you can hear me okay.
Yes, very good.
Over there in Portugal. So my question is about the Artemis Accords. I've heard some complaints from some member countries of ESA that they're not very happy. Some others are going specifically to the US and agreeing bilateral deals. I wonder, did you discuss this issue over the last day or so when you've been having these conversations between the ministers in attendance? And to Joseph specifically, do you think ESA should be the diplomatic interlocutor for these talks on the Artemis Accords, and would it help to have Europe negotiating as one directly with the US on the substance of that? Thanks.
Joseph?
No, thank you. Thank you, Joshua. No, this was again not on the table for discussion. The item of discussion was really the manifest which we have explained before, and so it was maybe in some side discussions, certainly not in the public round. Should ESA be the interlocutor? Certainly we are at the disposal of our member states. We certainly make an effort to coordinate with NASA and on one side, of course, and with our member states on the other side. Yes, I do see the role of ESA as being this coordinating body for Europe, which does not, of course, exclude that bilateral relationships are being established, as you perfectly know. So yes, this is something that is certainly on the table, but was not addressed during the meeting.
For those who are asking whether they can access the documentation from this meeting, I recall you ESA website has all the documents, the resolution that has been adopted today. There's a lot of text, and also for those who are interested, we're going to paste there the presentation from our Director General, so in case you'd like to refer to that. Also invite you to go to replay on our ESA Web TV, so you can have a look at some of part of the statements and sessions we had this morning. So now questions from Jeff Faust from the Aviation Week.
Hi, this is Jeff Faust of Space News. I have two questions, if I may. One on the protection of space assets accelerator in light of the Russian ASAT test this week and the large amount of debris it's created. Was there any discussion at the meeting about effectively accelerating that accelerator and putting more resources sooner into space situational awareness or debris removal projects, either within ESA or in cooperation with the European Commission? And then second, for the two inspirators, the Icy Moon sample return and the human space exploration, what are the next steps in moving those forward, since those seem to be longer term projects? Thank you.
No, thank you, Jeff. On the first one, protect and the ASAT test. Of course, this is in everyone's mind, as you can imagine, and in some of the statement it was mentioned. What is clear is that this has a direct link to the third accelerator on protect. Whether there's a European roadmap, you know about the various activities. I think what became clear is there's really an urgency to act, an urgency to make sure that we find a European common way forward. Today we have agreed on these accelerators. The events happened a week ago, or not even, less than a week ago. So you can imagine that this is all very fresh news and certainly not reflected in a political declaration as it was adopted today. But I think what is also clear is that this was for us a big reminder how important our space assets are to us. And if I say space assets, of course this includes the space station and our astronauts. Matthias Maurer, who is at the moment in the space station, is one of my staff members of ESA, and I have an obligation to protect him, as I have an obligation to protect other ESA staff in the different sites and establishments. And certainly that's something that we will take very serious. But of course, as you can imagine, Jeff, concrete actions and who is doing what is will be subject of discussion. It's partially a technical, partially a political discussion, but certainly the importance has been highlighted very clearly and will be addressed as soon as we can. Thank you.
Very good. So we move to Marta. Marta, please. Marta Silva from Fala Global.
Exactly. The question is to Portuguese Minister Manuel Heitor. If you don't mind, I would make the question in English, but I appreciate that answer in Portuguese. I don't know if it is possible. So the question is about the Portuguese space industry. How can they help to achieve a green future for Europe?
Marta, agradeço a pergunta. É interessante dizer e revelar e divulgar que divulgamos também nesta reunião o novo catálogo da indústria espacial portuguesa, que mostra bem a evolução ao longo dos últimos anos. Duplicámos, sobretudo em 3 anos, aquela que é o volume do setor, representava cerca de 25 milhões de euros em 2018, hoje representa acima de 52 milhões de euros e temos um objetivo claro, de multiplicar por 10 vezes na próxima década, desde que o setor venha a representar cerca de 500 milhões de euros por ano, 500 milhões de euros por ano em 2030, sobretudo representando também a criação de cerca de 1000 postos de trabalho. E a evolução dos últimos 3 anos mostra bem o que foi esse esforço. Mas temos já resultados concretos, sobretudo, por exemplo, na questão do cadastro. Estamos já a fazer, com a estrutura de missão para o cadastro e com a Agência para a Gestão do Fogo integrado à AGIF, a integração de imagens de satélite para possibilitar o cadastro de todo o território e com isso garantir a gestão sustentável do território e prevenir fogos. Também durante o último ano, Portugal, como sabe, numa parceria público-privado, criou pela primeira vez um operador de satélites, já com 2 satélites, Geosat 1 e Geosat 2, que têm já imagens de alta resolução. Por exemplo, foram estes satélites que fizeram a monitorização do vulcão na ilha das Canárias durante os últimos meses. E estes são dados e factos que nos mostram a acreditar que é com mais espaço, melhor espaço, que podemos continuar e por isso é que Portugal e Espanha, na última Cimeira, acordaram reforçar, através dos planos de recuperação e resiliência, o desenvolvimento de uma nova constelação de alta resolução, orientada sobretudo para acelerar o processo de transição ecológica, o que está totalmente articulado com a agenda hoje apresentada pela ESA. Muito obrigado.
Thank you. I'd like to get back to Jeff Faust from Space News. I suppose you had a double question, so Joseph.
No, thank you. Sorry, Jeff, I forgot to answer your second question you had on the inspirators and how they are being built up. It's a bit similar, the answer is similar than the one I gave before on the accelerators. What we got now in the Matsuhino's Manifesto is the mandate to me to explore them and to define them. So, of course, this will be work that needs to be done in the next months. They're a bit different, as you know. One is fitting better within an ESA framework of the science budget. Of course, it's more than what our science budget foresees today. So I will ask my Director for Science to make me a proposal, which is on one side certainly using the ESA science mechanism of the space science advisory groups and our mechanisms we have, and possibly also explore international cooperation. So this is one way. The second one on human exploration, of course, is a very different one, and that again, there we will work on the different boundary conditions and bring this back to our decision makers for reflection and eventually a decision one way or another on how we proceed. So yes, work needs to be done on both of them, but also on the accelerators in the next months, certainly towards the Space Summit and beyond in order to collect, to prepare more solid proposals on how to proceed. So this will take time, as you can imagine, discussions with various member states, people, also politicians. On some of them, it is a clear political decision, like in the human exploration, and the other one is probably more science budgetary decision, but yes, this process will be prepared.
I would like to call Clive Cookson from Financial Times, please, Mike. Clive? Clive Cookson? Okay, no answer. Maybe I give the floor.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry about that. I wanted to ask about another aspect of space debris in the context of Accelerator 3. We've talked about the ASAT test, but I wanted to ask about vast constellations of satellites in low Earth orbit. As you were starting the press conference, I got a release from Global Data which says the rapid increase in commercial LEO constellation could see billionaires and nation states render space unsafe and inoperable. The short lifespan of LEO satellites could create a minefield of smaller, untrackable fragments orbiting at devastating speed, blah, blah, blah. This is a major blind spot in international space law. Now, I know that ESA is not a space regulatory body, but Global Data is saying that the world's regulatory response is so weak. What can you, as leaders of ESA, do to do something about it? I think this is more serious even than ASAT tests, personally.
No, thank you. Yes, it is a very serious issue. I can only confirm what you say. This is something that was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, to many of us on how big the issue is and how serious it is. I mean, as you perfectly know, there have been, we estimate about 2,000 objects larger than 10 centimeters added to the debris. It will take more than 2 years until they are decaying. We expect that the risk, or we estimate that the risk for larger debris elements towards the space station, for example, has tripled. But it also may affect other satellites. Swarm, ALOS, also Starlink, by the way, might also be affected. So yes, this is a big issue. ESA is not a regulatory body, you're absolutely right, but we do work closely with our member states through the UN context on one side, but this may need additional measures, and this is an issue that concerns all of us. I mean, all of us who have space assets in order to tackle them and to resolve it. There are different elements to it, as you perfectly know, and certainly on the ESA side, I think we will intensify these efforts. We will work with the European Commission, where there's an EU SST program in place. In some member states, there are national facilities in place. ESA will certainly not do things that others are already doing. We will certainly avoid or not repeat or duplicate efforts, but look into, from a technical point of view, into elements that can be complementary. And help overall having a better overview of the situation. But it is also a political decision, and this we need to, in this case, we need to work with the political establishment. That means with the ministers and the European Commission and European Union, and that's certainly something that we will need to look into in the next, in the near future.
Good. Michael Weisflog, please, from Astrodrome. Michael?
Yeah, thanks. It's Michael from Astrodrome. I've got a question. There are a number of new space startups whose ideas can move Europe forward in terms of space, especially when it comes to space debris or Earth observation. However, a look at the procurement guidelines shows time and again that they're often excluded from important tenders. Are there efforts to remove these bureaucratic hurdles and make it easier for them to access the market and accelerate the developments?
Sorry, I could not hear one part of the question. Can you just repeat it? Sorry for that.
Yeah, no problem. There are a number of new space startups whose ideas can move Europe forward in terms of space, especially when it comes to space debris or Earth observation. And a look at the procurement guidelines shows time and again that they're often excluded from important tenders. They're too small, too young, and so on. Are there any efforts to remove these bureaucratic hurdles to make it easier for them to exit the market?
Okay, no, thanks, understood. Yes, we certainly are interested to foster and to develop these kind of companies. In fact, the one mentioned by Minister Heitor just a couple of minutes ago is one of those companies who wants to enter into this domain to offer on a commercial basis information on debris and the situation on debris information. So yes, we will certainly do this as part of the overall call it improvement of the commercialization efforts in ESA. I mentioned the new directorate before. Part of it will not only be to look towards venture capital funding aspects, as I mentioned before, but also into our rule set, making sure that young companies, entrepreneurs, startups can certainly have access to market. And I think I know what you are referring to. And yes, these are obstacles that we should diminish.
Pierre Sellerier from Agence France Presse. Please, Pierre. Can you hear us? So, we'd like to give the floor to Pierre Sellerier from the AFP, Agence France Presse. No? Okay. Daniel Cléry?
Yes, hello. A question for Director General Aschbacher. You talked about the Icy Moon's sample return. The Voyage 2050 is already considering missions to the Icy Moons. Would this one that's been announced today be in addition to that, or is it preempting what scientists are going to propose for that mission? How does it fit in with what is already being discussed and also with what NASA is planning in their trips to Europa?
No, thanks, Pierre. Sorry, Daniel. I can be short and say yes, this is partially, or this is contained in Voyage 2050, correct? But certainly we want to accelerate, and here the word accelerate is really the right term, the realization of this mission, and certainly be faster in terms of timing, but also in order to implement it. As you know, in Voyage 2050, it is an option to be, it's one of the options, it's one of the priorities, and also foreseen later, and certainly this is a focus that we want to put on some of the content of Voyage 2050.
So we're going to take a last question here from Ricardo Forde.
You hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is, what do you have intent for new innovations on the use of rockets heading up? Like, is there any new inventions to say, like, you want, how would I put it? You want money coming into your space agency. How are you going to bring in new money? Is there a way of showing new inventions other than rockets that can get us up there, not using and consuming so much fuel? Is there something there that you can put on the table that will get investors really wanting to invest?
Well, I can give it a try I hope that I understood your question well. So if I understood well, but please correct me if not, that if there are, how do we attract private investors for example, on the rocket part, but also other parts which are maybe coming outside the space domain? Yes, of course we want to. This is what is our interest in, and I'm speaking here as European Space Agency, is to develop space in Europe, and whether this is done through more the classical mechanisms of government funding or private investors who come from the outside and are willing and ready to invest into major programs. For me, this is both very welcome. I'm very happy that both happen. Of course, they would work in very different ways, and certainly something that if it happens, will be fully supported and highly encouraged.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of this session. I'd like to thank Minister Heitor and Joseph Aschbacher for this, and of course we meet you on our website for all these documents that are available to you. Don't hesitate to contact our media relations, and thank you very much for participating in this. Good afternoon.